Marigold, Mari, Ellis was exhausted. Another long night at Clark's diner, filled with impatient customers, mixed-up orders, and the ever-watchful eyes of Gideon Pratt, the manager who seemed to thrive on pointing out mistakes. But she didn't complain. This job paid her bills and helped cover her mother's medical expenses. So, she adjusted her name tag, forced a polite smile, and approached a new customer, a man dressed in a sharp black suit, an unusual sight in their little diner. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you?" she asked. The man looked up, his gaze sharper than she expected. He didn't have the usual weariness of someone grabbing a quick meal. He was observing everything. The people, the walls, the way the staff moved. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but kind. "A double cheeseburger and a vanilla milkshake, please." Mari nodded, jotting it down. But before she could leave, an elderly woman at the next table lost her balance, sending her tray crashing to the floor. Hot coffee spilled everywhere, and her burger rolled to a stop near Mari's feet. Without hesitation, Mari bent down to help her, steadying the woman's fragile arms as she tried to stand. The suited man immediately grabbed napkins, kneeling to clean the mess without a second thought. From behind the counter, Gideon's voice rang out, sharp and cold. "Ellis, leave that alone and get back to work." But Mari ignored him. She replaced the woman's meal, bringing her a fresh coffee, free of charge. The suited man watched closely, an unreadable expression crossing his face. Moments later, Gideon pulled Mari aside, his tone laced with disapproval. "You just gave away free food. That's theft." "It's not theft," Mari argued. "She spilled it by accident. I was just helping." "I don't care. We follow rules here. You're fired." Silence filled the diner. The customers whispered. The suited man set his fork down slowly, his focus shifting to Gideon. Mari felt heat rise in her face, humiliation, frustration, but she knew arguing was pointless. She untied her apron, placed it on the counter, and walked toward the door. But just as she reached it, a voice broke through the tension. "That," the suited man said, his tone calm yet firm, "was a big mistake." For the first time, Gideon looked uneasy. The cold night air wrapped around Mari as she stepped out of Clark's diner, her heart still pounding from what had just happened. Fired! Over something so small, so unfair. Her fingers curled into fists as she tried to steady her breathing. Rent was due in a week. Her mother's medication wasn't cheap. She needed this job. And now, just like that, it was gone. The streets were nearly empty, save for the flickering neon sign above the diner and the occasional passing car. She hugged herself, trying to process everything. Gideon had been looking for a reason to get rid of her, and tonight, he found it. But why did it sting so much? Maybe because she had given that place everything. Showing up early, staying late, covering shifts for coworkers who never returned the favor. And for what? To be tossed aside like she was nothing? She was about to start walking when she heard footsteps behind her. Slow. Measured. Someone was following her. Mari turned sharply, her pulse spiking, only to find herself face to face with the man in the black suit. The same customer she had just served. Theron Whitaker. Up close, he was even more striking. Tall, composed, with an intensity in his gaze that made it impossible to look away. His presence demanded attention, not in an arrogant way, but with a quiet authority that told her he was someone who got what he wanted. "I apologize if I startled you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I wanted to speak with you before you left." Mari exhaled, forcing her shoulders to relax. "If you're here to tell me Gideon was right, don't bother. I already know how this works. Managers always stick together." A ghost of a smile crossed Theron's face. "That's where you're wrong." Mari frowned. Something about the way he said it made her hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card, holding it out to her. "I'm Theron Whitaker," he said. "And I think you just lost your job for the wrong reasons." She stared at the card without taking it. Whitaker and Company. The name meant nothing to her. The lettering was embossed in silver, elegant but simple. No tagline, no job title, just a phone number. "Okay," she said slowly. "And what exactly does Whitaker and Company do?" "A little bit of everything," Theron replied vaguely. "But tonight, I was here for a specific reason. I came to Clark's to see how it was being run. To see how people are treated when they think no one's paying attention." Mari's heartbeat quickened. Something about the way he said it made her feel like he had seen more than just a spilled tray and a heartless manager. "And?" she prompted. Theron's expression darkened slightly. "And I saw enough." A heavy pause settled between them. Mari swallowed hard. "Wait, are you saying?" "I own Clark's Diner, Mari," he confirmed. Her stomach dropped. "What?" Theron studied her reaction carefully. "And after what I saw tonight, things are about to change." Mari took a step back, gripping the business card tighter. Gideon had just fired his own boss's employee. And by the look in Theron's eyes, he wasn't about to let that slide. Mari stared at Theron, her mind racing. He owned Clark's Diner? She had worked there for over a year and never once heard his name. Not from Gideon, not from the staff, not even in passing. Yet here he was, standing in front of her, looking like he had just witnessed something he couldn't ignore. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I don't get it. If you own the place, why were you sitting in a booth, eating a burger like any other customer?" Theron's gaze didn't waver. Because sometimes, the only way to truly see how something is running is to step back and watch. Mari let out a dry laugh, crossing her arms. "Well, you got quite the show tonight." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Yes, I did. And that's exactly why I'm here." She looked down at the business card in her hand. Whitaker and Company. The name still meant nothing to her, but it sounded powerful. Important. "Okay. So, what now? You fire Gideon? Give me my job back? Because I'm guessing he won't be too thrilled about that." Theron took a slow step closer, his voice lowering slightly. "Gideon's problems are his own. My concern right now is you." Mari hesitated, caught off guard by the weight in his words. "Me? You handled that situation better than most people would have," Theron said. "You saw someone struggling, and instead of ignoring it, you stepped in, even knowing there could be consequences." "That's rare." Mari felt her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being noticed like this. She was used to working hard, keeping her head down, and hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would appreciate the effort. Theron studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I have an opportunity for you. A job. Something better than Clark's." Mari blinked. "A job doing what, exactly?" A small smirk played at the corner of his lips. "That depends. Are you willing to take a risk?" Mari felt her pulse quicken. Something about this man, this entire situation, felt bigger than just a job offer. She wasn't sure if it was dangerous or just life-changing. Maybe both. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure whether to walk away or lean in. Mari's fingers tightened around the business card, its edges pressing into her palm like a silent challenge. A job. A better one. The offer was tempting, but something about it felt surreal. She had spent months dragging herself through the double doors of Clark's Diner, working endless shifts for scraps, only to be thrown out like she didn't matter. And now, a complete stranger, who just so happened to own the place, was offering her something better? Her instincts screamed to be careful. Nothing in life came easy, and opportunities like this rarely came without strings attached. She exhaled, meeting Theron's steady gaze. You still haven't told me what the job actually is. Theron studied her for a moment before answering. It's not waiting tables. Mari arched an eyebrow. Yeah, I got that much. But what does Whitaker and Company even do? A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it disappeared just as quickly. It's a private firm. We handle acquisitions, logistics, problem-solving. She frowned. That sounds vague on purpose. It is, he admitted. Because before I explain anything else, I need to know if you're the kind of person who can step into something unfamiliar without running. Mari let out a short laugh. I just got fired for helping an old lady. I think I've already proven I don't run. Theron's expression didn't change, but there was something unreadable in his eyes, like he was weighing something about her, making a decision in real time. Good, he finally said. Then let's go. Mari blinked. Go where? You want details? I'll give you details. But not here. He gestured toward a sleek black car parked a few feet away. We can talk on the way. Mari hesitated, looking between Theron and the car. Every rational part of her screamed, don't get into a car with a stranger. But then again, was he really a stranger? He owned Clark's Diner. He had been watching how things were run. He had seen what happened to her and had stepped in, not just to help, but to offer her something different. A week ago, she would have laughed at the idea of taking a risk like this. But standing here now, staring at a man who clearly operated in a world so far from her own, Mari felt something she hadn't in a long time. Possibility. Her grip tightened around the business card once more. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she took a step forward. All right, she said, voice steady. Let's go. Theron nodded once and opened the car door. As Mari slid inside, she had no idea that this single decision would change everything. The car door shut with a soft click, sealing Mari inside a world that felt completely foreign. The interior was sleek, leather seats, subtle hints of cologne in the air, and a quiet hum of an engine that barely made a sound. It was a stark contrast to the grease-stained booths and flickering neon lights of Clark's Diner. Theron slid into the driver's seat, his movements controlled, deliberate. For a moment, he didn't start the car. Instead, he studied Mari, his fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel. You can still back out, he said, his voice calm but unreadable. No hard feelings. Mari let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. If I was going to back out, I wouldn't have gotten in. A hint of approval flickered across his face. Without another word, he turned the key, and the car smoothly pulled away from the curb, gliding through the dimly lit streets. Mari watched the city blur past the window. So, are you going to tell me where we're going, or is this part of some dramatic reveal? Theron smirked slightly but kept his eyes on the road. It's not dramatic. It's necessary. There's something you need to see before you decide if this job is for you. Mari frowned. Decide? I thought you already decided. I know you're capable, he said. But capability and willingness aren't the same thing. This job requires both. His words sat heavy between them. For the next few minutes, the only sound in the car was the steady rhythm of the tires on the pavement. Mari stole a glance at Theron. There was something about him, something controlled, almost calculated, but there was no arrogance in the way he carried himself. He didn't talk just to fill space. Every word had weight, intention. It was unsettling, and, if she was being honest, intriguing. Finally, the car slowed as Theron pulled into a quiet industrial district on the outskirts of the city. The streetlights cast long shadows against the warehouses and old brick buildings. He maneuvered into a small, private parking lot and cut the engine. Mari looked around. Okay. This doesn't scream exciting new career opportunity. Theron simply opened his door. Come inside. Then tell me what you think." Mari hesitated, her fingers grazing the business card still in her pocket. A part of her wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. And yet, she followed him anyway. Mari followed Theron into the building, her footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. The air smelled faintly of metal and old paper, a strange mix of something industrial yet organized. This wasn't some abandoned warehouse. It was operational, but for what, she had no idea. The dim hallway opened into a large, well-lit office space. It wasn't flashy, but it was precise. Dark wood furniture, shelves lined with neatly arranged files, and a massive glass window overlooking the city. The walls held no personal photos, no unnecessary decorations. Everything had a purpose. Theron walked toward a sleek desk and gestured for Mari to take a seat in the chair across from him. She hesitated, then sat, crossing her arms. "All right," she said, "time to stop being mysterious. What is this place?" Theron leaned back slightly, studying her as if deciding just how much to say. Whittaker & Company is a private firm that specializes in assessing, acquiring, and restructuring businesses. Mari frowned. "Like corporate consulting?" Theron's lips twitched in amusement. "That's the simple version. But we don't just advise businesses. We step in when things go wrong. When corruption takes over. When people at the top abuse their power." Something in his tone sent a shiver down Mari's spine. "So, what? You fix companies?" "Sometimes," he said. "Other times, we make sure they collapse." Mari blinked. She wasn't sure if she had misheard him, but Theron's expression remained perfectly neutral. "You saw what happened at Clark's," he continued. "That diner isn't just a failing business, it's being bled dry by people like Gideon Pratt. Employees are underpaid, the books are manipulated, and customers are getting worse service because management cares more about cutting costs than running a decent place." Mari narrowed her eyes. "And what does that have to do with me?" Theron leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "You're a worker. You see things the right way, the way they affect the people actually keeping the place alive. That's what I need. Someone who knows how to read a situation from the inside." She let out a breath, shaking her head. "You want me to spy on businesses?" Theron didn't blink. "I want you to observe. To notice the details most people overlook. To help identify the weak spots that need to be fixed or exposed." Mari felt her heartbeat quicken. This was way more than just a job offer. It was a challenge, a gamble. A step into something she didn't fully understand. She should have been scared. Should have walked away. Instead, she found herself asking, "What's the first step?" Theron's eyes darkened slightly, as if he had just confirmed exactly what he suspected about her all along. "Welcome to Whittaker & Company, Mari." Mari let Theron's words sink in. Welcome to Whittaker & Company. Just like that, she had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand. A world where businesses weren't just companies, they were targets. Some were saved. Others? Destroyed. Her pulse quickened. "So, what now? Do I get a job title, a badge, a contract?" Theron smirked slightly, shaking his head. "No contracts. No badges. Not yet. First, I need to see if you can handle what this job actually requires." Mari raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the desk. Mari hesitated before picking it up, flipping it open. Inside was a series of documents, receipts, payroll reports, and a photo. Gideon Pratt. Her stomach twisted at the sight of him. "You've been looking into him." Theron nodded. "For a while now. Clark's Diner is just one of several businesses he's involved with. The man operates on greed, cutting corners wherever possible, taking from employees while covering his tracks. Firing you wasn't just about control, it was about making sure no one questioned him. Mari clenched her jaw. She had always known Gideon was a terrible boss, but she hadn't realized how deep his corruption went. "You want me to expose him?" she asked. Theron tilted his head slightly. "Not yet. First, I need you to go back to Clark's." Mari froze. "Go back? I just got fired." "Exactly," Theron said. "Which means Gideon won't see you as a threat. He'll assume you're desperate, that you'll beg for your job back. And when you do, I need you to pay attention to what he says, to what he doesn't say. People like Gideon always reveal more than they intend to when they think they have power over someone." Mari let out a sharp breath, leaning back in her chair. "And if he doesn't take me back?" Theron's expression didn't change. "Then we move to Plan B." Mari didn't like the way he said that. Like it was a certainty. Like no matter what happened, Gideon was already doomed. She exhaled, glancing down at the file one more time. A week ago, she had been just another waitress, trying to survive. Now, she was stepping into something bigger, something dangerous. And the craziest part? She wasn't sure she wanted to turn back. Mari stood outside Clark's diner, staring at the neon sign flickering against the dark evening sky. Just a few nights ago, she had walked out of this place humiliated, fired for nothing more than doing the right thing. Now, she was walking back in, not as an employee, but as something else entirely. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as she took a slow breath. "This isn't about getting your job back. This is about getting information." She pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of coffee and grease filled her lungs. The din of chatter and clinking plates surrounded her, but all she could focus on was Gideon Pratt, standing near the counter, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto her. For a split second, she saw surprise flicker across his face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by amusement. "Well, well," he said, crossing his arms. "Didn't expect to see you back here so soon." Mari swallowed down her instinct to snap at him. Instead, she forced her voice to sound controlled, just uncertain enough to be believable. I made a mistake." She glanced down, as if embarrassed. "I shouldn't have walked out like that. I need this job, Gideon." He leaned against the counter, tilting his head. "Oh, thought you were too good to follow the rules." Mari clenched her jaw. "Play the part. Let him think he has the upper hand." "I wasn't thinking straight," she said, letting just a hint of desperation seep into her voice. "I was upset. But I get it now. I just want to work." Gideon smirked, like he was enjoying this too much. "You think I just let you walk back in after the little scene you pulled?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't need employees who question how I run things." Mari's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I won't cause trouble. I'll keep my head down. Just give me another chance." Gideon stared at her for a long moment. She could practically hear the gears turning in his head. He liked having power over people. And what better way to prove it than by making her crawl back? Finally, he exhaled, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Fine. You can have your job back. But at a lower wage." Mari's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "He's testing you. Seeing how much he can take." She forced a small nod. "I understand." Gideon grinned, clapping a hand on her shoulder, a little too firm, a little too possessive. "Good girl," he said. "Now grab an apron. And don't give me a reason to regret this." As she turned toward the kitchen, she caught sight of the security cameras mounted in the corners of the diner. Her mind raced. Theron said people like Gideon always reveal more than they intend to. She just had to be patient. Watch. Listen. Because sooner or later, he was going to slip. Mari moved through Clark's diner like she had never left, her apron tied tightly around her waist, the scent of burnt coffee and grease settling into her skin like it always did. But this time, everything felt different. The diner hadn't changed, but she had. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was watching, listening, waiting. For days, she kept her head down and let Gideon think she was nothing more than a desperate ex-employee grateful to have her job back. She let him smirk when he passed her, let him toss snide comments her way about learning her place. She didn't react when he cut her hours or when her paycheck was suspiciously lower than before. She played her role perfectly. And in return, Gideon let his guard down. The first crack. It happened on Thursday night, just before closing. Mari was wiping down tables when the front door swung open, and a stocky man in a grease-stained jacket stormed inside. His heavy boots thudded against the floor as he made a beeline for the counter. "Gideon!" he barked. Mari kept her eyes on the rag in her hands, pretending to focus on a stain that wasn't there. But her ears were locked in. Gideon stepped out from the back, already scowling. "What the hell are you doing here, Hank? This is the third time you've pushed back payments," the man snapped, slamming a clipboard onto the counter. His voice was sharp, loud enough that a few customers turned their heads. "I'm not here for excuses this time. You either pay what you owe, or we stop delivering." "That's what you said last week." "My boss isn't happy, Pratt. We have other clients, paying clients." Mari dared to steal a glance at Gideon. His fingers tapped against the counter, a nervous tic she had started to notice whenever he felt cornered. "Tell your boss he'll have his payment soon," Gideon said, his voice lowering. "We don't want any problems, do we?" Hank exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, Gideon. We don't." He grabbed his clipboard and stormed out. Mari's stomach twisted. Suppliers demanding money? That meant cash flow problems. And cash flow problems meant desperation. The second crack. The next morning, Mari overheard a whispered conversation in the break room between two employees, Lisa and Devon. "You ever notice how your checks are always a little off?" Lisa muttered, stirring her coffee aggressively. Devon scoffed. "Please. You think Gideon actually pays us what we're supposed to get?" Lisa leaned in. "I checked my stubs. It's not just overtime he's cutting. He's skimming." Mari kept her expression neutral as she poured herself a coffee she didn't actually want. "He ever shorted you?" Lisa asked Devon. Devon let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. But when I asked about it, he just shrugged and told me to be grateful I even had a job." Lisa gritted her teeth. "Bastard." Mari took a slow sip of her coffee, her pulse pounding. Payroll fraud. Suppliers demanding payments. Gideon wasn't just a bad manager. He was running Clark's diner straight into the ground. The final crack. Late that night, the diner was empty. Mari had stayed late under the excuse of cleaning up, but really, she was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. Gideon was in his office, the door slightly ajar. Mari, careful as ever, moved quietly past the kitchen, pausing just outside. A voice, his voice, low and urgent. "I told you, I just need more time." A pause. "No, I'm handling it. Everything is under control." Another pause. Then a sharp breath. "If you come here, it'll just make things worse." Mari's stomach clenched. Who was he talking to? Then, Gideon's next words sent a shiver down her spine. "If I go down, I'm not going down alone." Her breath caught. Her instincts had been right. Gideon was on the edge. And all she had to do was give him the final push. She stepped away, heart hammering, and pulled out her phone. She didn't hesitate. She sent Theron a message. "He's ready to break. The reply came almost instantly. Then let's finish this. The morning after Mari's message, Clark's Diner felt different. The air was thick with something unspoken, like the diner itself knew what was coming. Employees worked in tense silence, customers shuffled in and out without the usual chatter, and Gideon? Gideon was sweating. Mari had never seen him like this. His usual arrogance, the swagger, the smirks, the condescending tone, was gone. Instead, he moved through the diner in jerky, restless motions, snapping at employees over nothing, flinching every time the front door swung open. He knew. Maybe he didn't know what was coming, but he felt it. And Mari? She just waited. At exactly 11:45 a.m., the door opened, and two men in suits stepped inside. Not customers. Not with the way their eyes scanned the place, calculating, assessing. One of them, tall and composed, adjusted his cufflinks like this was just another routine meeting. The other carried a black leather folder tucked neatly under his arm. Gideon saw them, and froze. His face paled for a fraction of a second before he forced a tight smile and stepped forward. "Gentlemen, can I help you?" The taller man, Everett Hale, from the Department of Labor, didn't smile back. "We need to have a word, Mr. Pratt." Privately. Mari felt electricity crackle through the diner. Conversations hushed, forks scraped against plates. Every employee stole glances from behind the counter, pretending to work. They knew something was happening. Gideon hesitated. Sure we can." Everett didn't wait for an invitation. He walked past Gideon and straight into the back office like he owned the place. The second man followed, shutting the door behind them. For the next 10 minutes, silence reigned. Mari could hear muffled voices, but she couldn't make out words. She didn't need to. Because when Gideon finally reappeared, his face was ashen. His hands trembled as he wiped at his forehead, his movements frantic. His eyes darted around the diner like he was already looking for an escape. No one spoke. No one dared to. Then, as if in slow motion, a black SUV pulled up outside. The door opened, and Theron Whitaker stepped out. Unlike Everett and his team, Theron didn't rush. He adjusted the sleeves of his suit jacket, exhaled slowly, and walked inside with the ease of a man who already knew he had won. His eyes met Mari's first. A subtle nod. "Good work." Then he turned to Gideon. "Let's talk," he said smoothly. Gideon staggered back, his usual bravado shattered. I don't know what you think you're doing, but—" Theron tilted his head. "No, Gideon. The question is, what do you think you're doing? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been skimming wages, doctoring invoices, and lying to suppliers." Mari caught the way Gideon's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Everett stepped forward, holding up a file. "We've been investigating for weeks. Employees being underpaid. Money disappearing. Multiple violations. It's all here." Gideon's entire body stiffened. You can't just—" Theron smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I can. And I did." Silence. Then Everett made it official. "Mr. Pratt, under federal labor laws, you are being formally investigated for financial misconduct, employee exploitation, and fraudulent business practices. You will be required to comply with all legal proceedings moving forward." Gideon opened his mouth. No words came out. Mari watched, heart pounding, as reality crashed down on him. His eyes flicked to her, the first time he had truly looked at her since this started. And in that moment, Mari saw it. He knew. He knew she had done this. The girl he had fired. The girl he had looked down on, humiliated, underpaid. And now, she had destroyed him. Gideon let out a broken laugh, running a shaky hand through his hair. "You think I'm the only one? You think this whole damn industry isn't built on people like me?" Theron didn't flinch. "I don't need to take down everyone, Gideon. Just you." Everett nodded toward his men. "You're done here, Pratt. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Gideon didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, his shoulders slumped. And just like that, it was over. Aftermath. By the end of the day, Gideon was gone. Theron didn't waste time. Clark's Diner was officially under new management. Employees were gathered. Payroll records were corrected. And Mari? Mari stood in the very same diner that had once felt like a prison and realized, for the first time in her life, she had power. She wasn't just another waitress anymore. She had changed something. Theron approached her as the last of the employees filed out, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You did well," Mari exhaled, shaking her head with a small laugh. "I still can't believe it worked." Theron smirked. "Believe it. And if you're ready, I have more work for you." Mari looked at him. At the diner. At the empty manager's office that had once belonged to Gideon Pratt. She had a choice. Go back to her old life, or step forward into something bigger. And for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly what she wanted. She turned to Theron and smiled. "Tell me what's next."